So this week, rather than a theme, I wanted to look more at a painting process, and particularly the way in which you might be using brushes and other implements to apply paint. So what I'm going to do over the course of this video is demonstrate some different stages of paintings that I'm working on at the moment, and I'm going to be using brushes, hog hair brushes like this, and also a thin sable brush like that one. So I'll talk to you about those. I'll also be applying paint with pieces of card, mounting card, and I'll talk about that as well. And I want to illustrate, I suppose, the painting process that I'm using at the moment. And hopefully by demonstrating that, there'll be things that you find useful for your own way of approaching things. So this is what I do at the moment, and it might appeal to you, or you might see a way of adapting it to suit your own ends. So there's no theme. I'm hoping that you'll find a theme. It worked quite well recently when people revisited old themes, so that there might be something that you can rework again. So I'm working on a series of paintings of boys fishing, mainly boys. I've got some girls, but it's boys this time. And at the moment I've been doing really enjoying drawing in biro. So I have got photographic references, and I've just been doing some little biro studies, which I will refer to. I also, as I said, have photographic references, so they'll be involved as well. Oh, wait a minute, stay calm. So, note to self, get that marked up. All right, so let me pause while I begin the first stage. So I'm working on a canvas board, which is 12 inches by 10 inches, and I'm going to work with this image of the two boys fishing, and I'm going to start with this sort of stage. So this is another one that I'm working on. I'm sketching out in burnt umber, dilute burnt umber, the lines that make up these figures and something of their setting. So I am going to use, this brush is in a terrible state. This is I think it's a number 4 hog hair bristle brush. You can see it's really lost it was a square brush at the beginning, but because it's hog hair, it's stiff, and that means that it will pick up quantities of paint. And I'm just going to begin with a kind of line drawing. And actually what I tend to do at the beginning is, I think the composition I've found is one guy there and one guy here maybe with that rod coming out. I think that's roughly what I want to get. So I'm making sure that this burnt umber is nice and dilute, and I'll just have a go at drawing these figures. This brush I've shown you, it's a little bit worn, so it has got a bit of a point. So I'm doing a kind of underdrawing, which you'll see eventually will disappear, or I think he's a bit taller. And is he? So yes, I'm just working with lines, and that I've been doing, as I said, quite a lot of biro drawings recently. Got an ambition to do some etching, and I've been looking at Anders Zorn's etchings, which are quite fantastic, and I find the sort of nearest thing to emulating that in a sort of sketchy way is a biro. And the lines that are contained in this biro drawing will be the start of my painting, as I'm showing you now, but they will also be a guide for later on. And it may be when I'm using bits of card or a very small brush that those lines that I've selected with the biro will come into their own again. So I'm using the same bit of paint. I haven't really taken very much paint, so it's kind of running out. So those lines can be a little bit fainter, a little bit gentler. I'll pause there while the car alarm stops. So that was a broad brush, just to get things down, roughly, loosely. Some of the things aren't quite as I wanted them, so I just smudge them away. I could clean that more, but you'll see in a moment it doesn't really matter to the way things develop. But what I'd like to do now is use this smaller brush. So this is a very fine brush. It's virtually the mythical one hair brush. And with that I can do very, very fine lines. And I want to just check what's in my drawing, because what I like about this this scene that I caught in a photograph is their different postures. And I think things like the position of the head, the hands in pockets, there are little details which I think are important to the mood and the narrative of this painting. So I'm just getting them sorted with this finer brush. You can see the paint is pretty fluid, and actually that's one important sort of difference between the brush I'm using now. It's a sable brush, so it's a soft brush, and soft hair brushes are designed to pick up liquid, fluid. So, you know, a watercolour brush to pick up a runny medium. What the hog hair brushes, the stiff bristle brushes that I'll be using when I start applying more substantial amounts of paint, what they're designed for is to actually pick up a solid amount of paint and deposit it on the surface of the painting. So that's more substantial paint. It's not runny paint. You can make it a little bit more fluid with medium, which I'll be doing, but it's not runny. So I think that's some of the observations that I wanted to make more precise, more definite with the thinner brush, because I can really draw, and things like, you know, the anatomy, the position of the arms and the legs, the angle of this shoe, and so on. And that foot which is up on the edge of the jetty. So something like that is what I want to strengthen. I'll pause again. So I made a few more adjustments. I really wanted to get this bended leg and the foot up on the edge of the key, and I've changed the angle of his leg. So now I've got a much bigger brush. This is maybe about an 8. Oh, it's a 10. There we go. I made a mixture of burnt umber, titanium white, and a little bit of ultramarine. So I've made a browny grey because I want to work with a wet in wet technique, and so I want to cover most of the painting with this mixture. And so this is where the drawing doesn't completely disappear, because I've taken time to get things where in the right place. And so I want to paint around these shapes, but I'm also going to fill them in. And I think it's just quite good to use this big brush. If I turn it, it's a fairly square brush, so I can turn it on its side. And although I was at pains to get some of those lines in the right place, I think it's still okay to lose them a bit now, because I'm going to leave something of them. And I think there's also just a process whereby if you observe those refinements, you remember them with the help of, you know, the few lines that are left over. So when I come to block in colour, I think I've noted in my mind and also a little bit on the canvas what needs to be retained or emphasised. So I'll pause again because that's a bit boring to watch. I'll get the whole thing filled in. So I've covered most of the canvas surface. There are a few little white gaps in places. I've sort of lost the landmass in the distance, but I'm doing this because I want to work wet in wet. So I've now mixed up some colours for the sky, and I'm still using the 10 brush, and I'm just going to block in some areas. I've got a blue-grey, and I've got a slightly whiter one. I have been looking at the photograph just to see what was going on, what sort of a sky it is. And you can see that as I work wet in wet, what's on the end of the brush is no longer clean paint. But that's okay for this situation, because I want the wet surface to absorb some of that colour. I'm going to clean my brush now and dry it and put on some of the lighter colour. And just put that in between. You can see it starts bright there and then it loses its lightness. So that's getting that blocked in. So I'm starting using the bigger brush. I'm starting with these big areas, the sky, and then I'll do the water next. And I'm quite happy for this to mix a bit, because the kind of effect I want for the sky is, you know, a subtle change from light areas to shadow areas. And in some places, because like now, I'm barely making a difference. So that mixture of burnt umber and ultramarine that I started with, that's appearing everywhere in places, and it's even mixing with the colours that I'm applying. So that's helpful, that unifies things. But just to make the point, if I really want something to stand out, so this is my number 10 stiff hog hairbrush. I've got paint there just sitting on the tip. If I really want a bright bit of light on a cloud, then I'm holding my brush parallel with the painting and I'm floating this paint on so that it stays really clean. That's quite thick. I mean, I could probably spread that out a little bit, but the more I work it, the more it'll lose its lightness, the less clean that colour will be. And I might put a little bit more over here. So what's on the brush now isn't so clean, but I can still use that in other places. So what I'm going to do now is fill in the water and then start working on the figures and talk to you about that. So I've blocked in the water and I'm now just blocking in the landmass behind them. And I just wanted to show you, this is still the number 10 brush, so it's broad brush strokes, but because it's a squarish form, I can turn it on its side when I need to do something a bit thinner or narrower. And those lines that I began with, that I was very careful about being precise to observe the poses, they're gradually getting kind of bitten into by what's blocked in around them. I'm now going to start blocking in the figures, and I'm back to my number 6, I think, was it number 4? Very worn hog hair brush. This should be a square head, but it's worn down to a sort of filbert. I've made some mixtures for hair, so I'll do that first. So what I'm going to do then is just block in some of the darker colours using my brush, and then I'm going to put lighter colours on using the bits of card. So that's those two heads. I'll clean that brush. I think I'll go straight for Ivan's jacket. So I've cleaned that brush and I've wiped it so that it's dry, and I've got a blue shadow colour for this jacket. And I'm holding the brush almost parallel to the painting. I don't mind a little bit of mixing, but I want to keep that dark, fairly dark. I'll just show you, you can see now that blue paint has mixed with what's underneath it, so it's not clean. So I have to at least wipe that brush. I don't really need to clean it in spirit, I just wipe it and pick up some clean paint. And I've just got to paint fairly directly, really. That's where the shadow is on the arm. That's now not clean paint. So I better get a bit more, wipe the brush. And I think that's where my last shadow is, down here. And I think a little bit on the side of the jacket as well. I've made a lighter blue, and I'm going to apply that with a piece of card, and I've been cutting up these bits of card into fairly small pieces. Got loads of these, so something like this. So this is a bit like using the different size brushes for the different jobs that I've been illustrating. I need something fairly small. In fact, I might use the other end, this bit of card, and I'm mixed up a lighter blue. And so there's the paint on the bit of card, and I want to put in this pattern of lighter colour. I don't know, that's a very good choice of colour. It's quite thick because I've made it so fluid. And sometimes I find that paint's a bit too thick for my liking, but I let it dry and then I can scrape it off a bit. There you see I haven't managed to get the paint on. I need to wipe that bit of card, I think, just like I'm wiping the brush. Pick up some clean paint just to get that bit blocked in. So there's some light on there, and since I've got a few other colours mixed, I'll just keep going. I've made something dark for his trousers, and I'm still with the same size brush. And remembering what I gathered from trying to draw him precisely, I'm just trying to get the angles of these legs, but also a certain amount of anatomy between the broader thigh and the thinner lower leg. And then one more colour. I made a slightly darker skin colour. So what has he got? He's got an arm here and a hand. And I think also I need to get something, I've done something odd about his head and his neck. I think he's got a bit of neck showing. And I would also like to give them both maybe some ears. So I'll pause. No, I'm ready. I need another piece of card. And I just want to put some light on the hand. So I've mixed up a lighter skin colour. So you can see my strategy. I'm using the brush for some of the dark areas, And then I'm using the bits of card for putting on the lighter paint, which means a number of things. I mean, you can use a palette knife for this sort of work, but I find that the card, it's easier to draw with the card. I think sometimes palette knives just give you the same mark every time. I don't know, that's a bit much on that ear and neck. We'll see when I do the hair. Palette knives can often give you the same mark, and it can become a bit sort of mechanical, whereas I find I can move this bit of card around in my hand and draw with it. But I've blocked in areas with the brush, and that kind of pushes the paint a bit into the surface. You really, with a piece of card, can float the paint much more easily, and as I've explained, I'm picking up much more paint, sometimes too much. I'll pause while I make some colour for the hair. So I want to adjust his hair a little bit more. He is leaning his head forward, so there is quite a lot of neck on view. And then I've made a lighter colour to get some light on the top of this head. I have to lean on the painting just to... That bit of card might be too big. But you see, I'm just imprinting. That's a bit better, although it went too far, so I might have to scrape some of that off. Give his cousin a little bit of light. So, I think what I need to do is a little bit more painting. Mixing some colours and then explaining myself again. But so with that figure, I've used all these different approaches. I've drawn it out carefully with a thin sable brush. I've blocked in colour with a bigger brush around the figures, and I've used a slightly smaller brush for some of the dark areas, and I've used the card for the light. So that's my kind of process. So I've used a brush to block in some of the darker areas in the other lad's clothing and his legs. And now I'm just I use the brush, not the card. I'm now going to use a bit of card just to put on some of the lighter colours. And as I said, I like the card because a lot of paint goes on. You can see that's quite thick. And also I can draw with it. And by taking that approach of blocking in the darker areas with the brush and using a fairly big brush, there's a high likelihood that these different colours will mix, which is what I want. And because I've got a certain quantity of colour onto the painting, I can then move it around a little bit with the card. So here with his shorts, this is a bright colour. And I want to get this leg coming down, and the other one just receding a bit. Something like that. That's quite a bright jump. I almost like to, what I'm going to do is pick up a bit of the darker colour and just try and mix them a bit, just with that leg. Bringing them together, softening that effect. And then I wanted to put some light on this leg. Curve it a bit to get the curve of the calf, and a bit of light on the other leg as well. So that works a bit better actually. He's come out better. I'm going to put some light on those ears. Then I'm just going to bring bring the camera a bit closer to the painting to explain what else I might do, how else I might do it. So there's obviously more to do to the background, but there are various things to do to these figures. As I say, the one on the left came out actually a lot better. I still have to paint the key side that they're standing on, but there are things to sort out with the taller figure. So for example here I went a bit far. I might take some of that off with a palette knife now. But otherwise, and probably better still, would be just to leave it dry. Or I could get some of the sky colour. Oh no, there you go, got some. And I would use, not the biggest brush this time, but still sort of medium-sized brush. And I want to just cut in a bit. Because that's such a light colour, that might draw a lot of attention to the head. But I can tidy up a little bit there. There's more work to do around here. I think what's missing as well with Ivan in blue is there are some markings on his jacket. So I just want to get a little white line to go around his neck, which I've done with that thin brush, and I've made sure that the paint was fluid that I applied, and there's also an edge to his jacket down here. So I am using this very fine brush to get some details. I think I would use the card to get the rod, and I would like to get a bit more warmth into them actually, because they're fairly, I've done a sort of shadow colour and a light colour on their arms, and I think this could be a bit more colourful actually. So I'm going to mix a different colour for a slightly warmer colour for the skin, give them both a neck. So I think that's hopefully enough to give you some thoughts about the size of brush. Perhaps, as I did, some careful drawing at the beginning, but then blocking in. I've been working wet in wet, and I've reserved the use of the card to apply paint for the smaller, lighter areas. And I would let the whole painting dry, and I would go back in again with all of those approaches. The bigger brush for the big areas, and then working down to smaller, finer details. The only other thing I wanted to say about brushes, this is got to be the world's worst painting brush, but what really does for brushes is the roots, is paint getting into the roots. So when you clean brushes, you really want to draw the paint out of the roots. I tend to sort of pull it up, dip it into some spirit. You can bang it on the base of the jar or the can, but that probably doesn't do it much good. What really matters is you can see it there in the roots. That's where the paint, if the paint is left in there and dries, then your brush, the flexibility, the length of those hairs will get shorter and shorter. I've got a newer brush here. So if you dip them in spirit and then try and squeeze them so that you get the paint out of the roots, and do it a few times, and you'll be surprised that actually you can still get quite a lot out. I suppose you can split the hairs a bit as well, but it's basically preventing paint drying in the roots, which will shorten the length of the head of the brush and therefore make it less useful. So there we go. I'll stop there because it's going to be 30 minutes. But I hope that you'll find some subjects of your own and that we'll have a conversation about what brushes you want to use, how you use them, and whether other implements like the pieces of card or the knife can be used in particular ways as you gradually work towards a kind of emphasis in your painting with lighter and brighter colours applied more substantially. Okay, see you tomorrow.